Ultron in the MCU is one of the more interesting characters from an adaptation standpoint, and one of the most contentious in online discussion. Many fans criticise his depiction in Age of Ultron, citing his comic self's very serious, murderous personality compared to the film's much quippier take. But to me, this is sort of missing the forest for the trees, since the circumstances behind Ultron's creation could not be adapted at the time, and possibly still couldn't even if they'd saved him for Avengers Doomsday next year. I think this is the difference between adapting the letter of the original versus the spirit of the original. Let me explain. About today's sponsor, Marvel Contest of Champions. This popular mobile fighter is now having its PC launch after a decade of availability on mobile, now with keyboard and mouse, controller, or even fight stick support for those not fond of touchscreen controls. And yes, the visuals have been upgraded for this version, including the textures and running at 60 FPS, so this isn't some quick and dirty port job. Developer Kabam Games is clearly aiming for this to be more than just that mobile Marvel fighting game that gets dismissed by the FGC. Worried about your progress? Fear not, my friend. Cross progression is a key feature of this version, allowing you to switch seamlessly between big screen couch action and on the go mobile action. And did I mention the game is free? I didn't? Huh. Well, it is. So you can do crossplay across multiple systems without having to break the bank or break into a bank and get stopped by Spider-Man. And in this genre, you normally have to pay like $40 for a handful of characters that drop several months apart, while Contest of Champions is out here giving them out for free every fortnight. And with over 300 Marvel heroes and villains to acquire and then upgrade through the game's deep RPG progression, you're going to want that crossplay and price point. 300 sounds like a lot, but you have to remember, the game's been running strong since the year Age of Ultron came out, funnily enough. And if 300 isn't enough, there are more on the way with the upcoming Fantastic Four movie. They'll be joining their comic counterparts soon, so this is the perfect time to get in on the action. Remember, there's a new one added every couple of weeks, so there's fun to be had just predicting and anticipating who's getting added next. We've got She-Hulk, we've got Emma Frost, we've got Captain Britain, Jubilee, Venom, Unstoppable Colossus, Deadpool, Gwenpool, Howard the Duck, Sauron, Cassie Lang, Night Thrasher, Onslaught, Dazzler, Dust, Bastion. Really, we got Bastion in here? Holy! I'm shocked by how little of the roster consists of variants of existing characters. Colour me impressed, Kabam Games. Marvel Contest of Champions is available to wishlist on Steam now. The more people who do so, the greater the rewards for the entire player base, which will help you get going if you're checking it out for the first time. So go do that now to benefit your fellow true believers. You can also join my new alliance, the Combat Kings, for both assistance and rewards. And hey, both versions of Ultron are in the game, so you're free to choose whether you want the letter of the original or the spirit thereof on your roster. Hell, maybe you can appreciate both. And on that note, thank you Kabam Games for sponsoring the video. Let's get back to it. Ultron in the comics is the creation of Hank Pym, the original Ant-Man and a founding member of the Avengers. Initially just him experimenting with AI, Ultron gained sentience and thus one of the team's greatest nemeses was born. When not depicted as the all-encompassing all-star team and just a smaller part of the larger Marvel universe, Ultron is typically the biggest threat faced by the Avengers. Now, Ultron's mind is based on the brainwaves of Pym himself, and this is where Ultron's entire personality and many of his classic schemes spawned from. Ultron is a digital reflection of all of Hank Pym's flaws, from his need for control to his mental instability, with even his god complex arguably coming from Pym. Much of this, arguably, is retroactively a result of Pym's history of mental illness, Ultron unwittingly inheriting it from his father. He even goes on to create his own robotic lifeforms in the likes of Vision and Jocasta, who in turn side against him and become his greatest foes. Jocasta is in fact designed after Janet Van Dyne and named for the mother-turned-wife of Oedipus in a not-so-subtle nod to Ultron's infatuation with Pym's wife, while considering Pym himself to be his father. Everything that he is comes from his creator. He is the archetypal dark reflection of a hero, just with a focus on his mental state and personality over his powers and appearance. There was even a time where Ultron made a new body for himself based on Janet, he's so obsessed. Now let's jump over to the MCU. The founding roster here is half retained and half different, with Hank and Janet being absent from the setting entirely until Ant-Man closes out Phase 2, right after Ultron's film. So Hank retaining his role as Ultron's creator doesn't work in this setting. It's a thing you see in a lot of new continuities adapting characters and storylines from the source material or other iterations. The setting or the character relationships and arcs are in too different a place to adapt things directly, and concessions need to be made to make it fit at all. Sometimes you get a good alternative that becomes standard for future versions, or at least one that still feels true to the source, even with its surface level alterations. A good example would be MCU Shang-Chi, who instead of Fu Manchu is the son of the Mandarin. So sometimes it does work out. Sometimes it sucks. But Ultron has to be adapted, right? He's their Magneto, their Doctor Doom. You don't make an adaptation and just not include him across multiple installments. But moving Ultron's position to after Hank's debut would also not work so well, since the live-action format and the inevitable departure of the core cast members would mean that by the time Hank is sufficiently set up as the man to create Ultron around Phase 4 or 5, half the iconic Avengers like Cap and Iron Man would already have left, and Ultron coming in to fight a team of like Sam Wilson, Doctor Strange, Scott Lang and Captain Marvel wouldn't hit the same as Steve, Tony, Thor and Hulk. You know, doing Dark Phoenix after Scott has died just wouldn't work. Good thing that never happened. So Hank would have to be introduced alongside Ultron here, in Phase 2, and it still wouldn't have the same impacts because who the hell is Hank Pym here? He's just some guy we just met and who has a petty beef with the Avengers. On the surface, that sounds accurate, but it's not true to the original, where he was a founding member who slowly descended into insanity. So if it doesn't work to introduce them together, nor to delay Ultron to build up Hank's importance, how else can Ultron be faithfully adapted in the MCU without a complete rebuild from Phase 1 that introduced Hank before the team formed? Well, exactly what they did in the end. Choose a different Avenger to create Ultron and be the basis for his personality. And really, out of all the Avengers, even those in the comics, I don't think anyone fits the bill better than Tony Stark. Tony was established in the comics, particularly around the era of Civil War, and in the MCU itself in Iron Man 3, as the kind of man who would design some advanced machine for defense purposes, being misled by his paranoia and creating something horrific. After all, it builds on his core concept as a genius in the field of mechanical engineering, given his form of superheroics. It builds upon the MCU adapting Jarvis as an AI instead of a butler and his various other AI-driven inventions. It builds on Stark's PTSD and paranoia that resulted from the events of the first Avengers film, making this feel like a proper sequel and not some unrelated other story that occurred between the two main stories. All of this creates a solid through line for Stark's character going back to the very beginning and serves to set up the next film's conflicts in a way that makes Tony much more sympathetic than he was in the comic that inspired it. Add on Ultron's personality now being directly based on Tony's quippy self, just with more of a sociopathic demeanour, and he is the final piece of the puzzle that makes Tony's full arc in this setting come together. Iron Man. Tony is a war profiteer who is humbled and decides to change, defeating a copycat from his past who reflects the man Tony could have become without his change of heart. Iron Man 2. Tony's flaws are put on full display, setting the stage for Tony's later self-doubt. The Avengers. Tony becomes a team player and proves his willingness to make the sacrifice play, but he also receives a rude awakening regarding exactly how big the universe is and what awaits out there to threaten humanity. Iron Man 3. He is haunted by what he witnessed up in space and is growing paranoid about it. The Iron Legion is his solution to this, a larger force that can act in his stead, devoid of his own human flaws, powered by AI, somewhat akin to Jarvis. He does destroy them by the end at Pepper's insistence, and begins working on a different solution to the problem that is still not yet solved. Age of Ultron. After being given a horrific vision of a potential future by Wanda, Tony designs Ultron to be that suit of armor around the world that the Legion was supposed to be. Ultron absorbs all of Tony's flaws and becomes an even more insidious reflection of what Tony could have been, and actually is in the eyes of the people of the nations impacted by his weapons. Ultron works with arms dealers and commits acts of terror and genocide, all while lightheartedly quipping about his evil schemes. There is some reassurance when Jarvis becomes Vision, but the guilt is still there, still building. And as a founder of the team and technically their boss after S.H.I.E.L.D. folded, Tony still feels responsible for them, even when he's not directly involved, as seen in Civil War. The incident that gets the Sokovia Accords going is a mission that Tony isn't even involved with, but feels responsible for. This all adds up from Ultron's actions, to the general devastation he was somewhat blind to back in New York, up to the way he is seen by so many around the world. The dam bursts and Tony is now trying to control the Avengers because the guilt and the fear has all become too much for him to handle. The Avengers split apart because of this, ultimately enabling Thanos' victory in Infinity War, marking Tony's greatest failure yet, leading to him quitting entirely. He only rejoins the team for Endgame once he sees a way to undo what, in his mind, is all his fault. And then he makes the ultimate sacrifice, ending his journey by harkening back to Steve's assertion about Tony back in 2012, and setting in stone the message that he has a heart from 2008. Now, I know that was a lot of waffling about Iron Man, but I hope I've illustrated clearly that Ultron is the key middle piece to Tony's entire arc, setting all of Phase 3 into motion, effectively being the linchpin for the entire Infinity Saga's storyline. Now, does being important make him a faithful adaptation? Well, no. But it's important for Ultron to tie into a major Avenger with a genius intellect and some kind of technological expertise. And so, with how the MCU was built up in its first two phases, swapping out Pym for Stark was the logical way to go. I also think it works better since Tony is a roboticist unlike Hank, and already had a sapient AI of his own design from film 1. But the main takeaway here is that they chose the character that allowed Ultron's origins to remain as intact as possible given the then current state of the setting, and then used him to reflect the worst aspects of his creator and direct said creator's character development from that point onwards, as any good Ultron depiction should. So while on the surface, Ultron in the MCU is not Ultron at all because the letter of the source wasn't followed in making him a sinister, genocidal, Skynet-adjacent mastermind, I feel that he's true to the spirit of said source by being a dark reflection of a heavily flawed founding Avenger. And that, to me, makes him as Ultron could possibly be in the MCU. If you liked this video, why not subscribe and support me on Patreon like these fine people here? If not, then make sure to share it with your enemies so they can suffer along with you. Today's recommended video is Everything Great About Avengers Age of Ultron by CinemaWins. Always good to have some positivity around, and this is a good excuse to shill this fun channel.